Alrighty, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Bird's Nest podcast. My name is Joe Donahue, and this is a rough day. It's still a rough day, but it's definitely a little better than the previous few. Um, so, uh, as we all know at this point, the Eagles did not come out on top in Super Bowl 57. Uh, they lost it was a real heartbreaker to the Kansas City Chiefs, to Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes, 38 to 35, off of a really, really anticlimactic end to uh, the 2022-23 NFL season, and a really, really anticlimactic end to the Super Bowl, which was one of the best Super Bowls we have seen in quite some time, just in terms of a game watching standpoint from the quality of the game. It was a really, really good scene that was, or a good game that was unfortunately marred by the Eagles losing. So let's talk about it. And then we will also get into some of the news that's broken in the aftermath, um, particularly the loss of both the Eagles' offensive and defensive coordinators. The Eagles are the first team to have had that happen to them in the same offseason, that both offensive and defensive coordinators have left to go on to other roles, and certainly hope that it goes well for them. But alas, that leaves us in a pickle. So let's start to take a look at this game here, because this was very, very simply, it was a tale of two halves. You've probably heard a lot of the national media talking quite a bit about this game, even a lot more of the local media too. I mean, that have been talking quite a bit about this game, talking quite a bit about why or about how this loss occurred. Um, so we all know, and those of us who watched the game, which certainly was probably most Eagles fans know, that this was a tale of two halves. The Eagles, in the first half, were incredibly dominant. Um, they were incredibly dominant when it came to offense, controlling the football. There was really only one major error. Really, throughout the entire game, there was only one major error by the offense, which was the Jalen Hurts fumble that occurred in the second quarter that allowed the Chiefs to come back and tie the game on a scoop and score. But throughout the first half, and really throughout the entire game, there were no real major issues. The Eagles held the ball for 21 minutes and 54 seconds through the first half. Compare that to the Chiefs' 8 minutes 6 seconds in the first half. The Chiefs were really not on the field all that much. They did a great job of keeping the game close. Certainly, the fumble by Jalen Hurts helped. That was a 7-point swing for them. And in a game where the Eagles lost by 3, that kind of a play makes a big difference. So we take a look at the game here. The Eagles in that first half had 17 first downs. 17 first downs compared to the Kansas City Chiefs 6. The Eagles were able to hold Kansas City to 6 first downs through 30 minutes of play. That's impressive. And for Kansas City, only one of those first downs came on a penalty. So they really only earned 5 of those first downs. The Eagles, when you rule out the penalties, the Eagles had 15 first downs. So the Eagles more than tripled the number of first downs that Kansas City had in the first half. You look through the first half again. Rushing was a really big thing. The Eagles had rushed 22 times for 87 yards. There was a commitment to the run game even after Jalen Hurts fumbled. There would continue to be a commitment to that running game. There was a lot to look at that was really, really good on the offense, and even a little bit on the defense too. They were able to hold Patrick Mahomes' passing yards to less than 100 in the first half, less than 90 really in the first half. Patrick Mahomes went 8 for 13 in the first half for 89 yards with one touchdown, or with one passing touchdown. Again, the Chiefs scored twice in the first half. Only once came on an offensive possession. The other was the scoop and score return for 36 yards. Kansas City Kansas City was very simply not on the field. We go back and we look at the drive summaries for the first quarter and for the second quarter. The Kansas City, their first drive, they went down, they marched down the field, they matched the Eagles' first drive, which was the Eagles' first drive, of course, ended in a touchdown. So it was the Eagles scored a touchdown, Kansas City marched down, scored a touchdown, and then the Eagles came back. The Eagles had to punt the ball on their next possession. The Eagles had Aaron Siposs back, which was a really, really key thing. Aaron Siposs's punts were significantly longer than Brick Kern's. This first punt by Aaron Siposs was 57 yards. 57 yards for this first punt. So that was a big, big, big deal. So that having been said, special teams on that punt allowed a 12-yard return. We'll come back to special teams because I have a bone to pick with them throughout this game as well. But Kansas City couldn't do anything with it once they got the ball back after their defense stopped them from scoring. They marched down the field. They got down to the Eagles' 24-yard line before the drive stalled. And then Harrison Butker went over and tried to kick the field goal, and it bounced off the upright. It doinked off the upright, no good. So the Eagles got the ball back, and the Eagles kept the ball end of the quarter, first play of the second quarter. The Eagles scored, and Kansas City was forced to punt on their next drive. Kansas City, as you look at it, Kansas City punted throughout the entire second quarter. There were the one score was that defensive scoop and score in the second quarter. There was no Kansas City holding the football no Kansas City drive that ended in a score. So, after that first drive in the first half, that was a really, really, really big deal for them, and unfortunate for the Eagles. And the Eagles went into halftime up 10 points because the Eagles scored after the scoop and score. The Eagles marched down the field and scored again. And then they scored a field goal to send them into halftime with a score of 24-14. That was it at halftime. And then Rihanna came out. We all had fun. We were all watching her and watching a really, really incredible halftime show. And I think the Eagles' defense got left in the locker room still looking for more from Rihanna because they came back, and it was absolutely abysmal performance by the Eagles defense following that. Kansas City got the ball to start the second half, and the Eagles, they made adjustments, and the Eagles had no answers for them. None. The Kansas City Chiefs went down the field and had they had six first downs in the first half. They had 21 to finish the game. 21 first downs to finish the game. That's 15 first downs. It's more than the Eagles had in the first half. No, it's not. I apologize. It's too shy of the Eagles, what the Eagles had in the first half. Of those first downs, 8 of them came off of passes. 8 of them came off of passes. 7 of them came off of runs. And then, of course, there was the holding penalty that gave the Kansas City Chiefs the first down at the end of the game that iced the game. That's a different issue. We'll get there. Kansas City went 4 for 8 over the course of the game. Kansas City was 4 and 8 on third downs in the first half. If you actually look at it, they didn't. There was no time where they got to third down where they were successful in the first half, and in the second half, they went 4 and so all 4 of their conversions on third down came in the second half. It's not something that you want to see. That is not okay. And that comes down to the defense. That comes down to making sure that the defense is able to make stops. One of the things that I had said at the beginning, or as we were going into this weekend, was that the Eagles defense needed to make stops. The Eagles defense needed to make critical stops. Takeaways would have been a big thing. But even if it wasn't the case, keeping Mahomes from scoring, it would have been would have even just been all that much better. Certainly, we would have loved to have a Brandon Graham strip sack like we had in Super Bowl 52, but we didn't. We did not get that. Patrick Mahomes had all day back there, and that is absolutely abysmal. We're 8 passing first downs in the second half, 7 rushing first downs in the second half. I'm sorry. 6 rushing first downs. My math is a little bit iffy today. I apologize. But you look at it. I mean, the Eagles lost a fumble. Patrick Mahomes has never, and the Kansas City Chiefs have never lost a game where this season where they've been behind. Or where they've been ahead or equal in the takeaway giveaway ratio. Kansas City they've never done that. So the fact that this is the case where they now have where they now are ahead in the ratio, in the turnover ratio, it's absolutely rough. It's this is the kind of stuff that is necessary. Now, we take a look at this. Jonathan Gannon routinely said all throughout the season that sacks don't mean anything to him. It's pressure on the quarterback. And I understand, certainly, and I alluded to this at the on Friday when we talked about our keys to victory in Super Bowl 57, that Patrick Mahomes is going to be the kind of person who's going to know to get the ball away. But the fact that the Eagles' sack defense, the Eagles had the number 1 sack defense in the league, in that they were the number 1 they were the number 1 in sacks. They had 12.59% of times that the quarterback went back to throw the football, he was sacked. That's first in the league. That's a little bit more than 1 out of every 10 times that the quarterback dropped back to throw. That cannot happen. The fact that the Eagles had zero sacks on Patrick Mahomes. That is what cannot happen. So the Eagles defense really did not bother to show up in the second half. There were guys who were left wide open. There were 2 plays that were pretty much identical. The only thing that changed was that they were run on different ends of the field. And the same player was wide open in that game, or wide open on that play. That's not okay. We need to make sure the Eagles going forward need to make sure that they're working, that the defense is staying on alert, that the defense isn't letting guys go open. Now, I understand there's something to be said here. Again, there were a lot more rushing in the second half. Again, there were 6 first downs on. And there were 6 first downs in the second half that came off of rushes. So there were a lot more. There was a lot of that. But by the same token, there's something to be said for letting the opponent do a little bit of running. As long as you keep them in bounds, you keep the clock moving, etc. There's something to be said for that. But you also can't be giving up 8 passing first downs, which is what happened. And this is the biggest thing. I was looking through all this stuff, and there were some miscellaneous stats that come at the end of the game book. And this is possibly one of the most interesting things here. The 10 longest plays for the Kansas City Chiefs offensively. So let's rule out the scoop and score, which was a 36-yard scoop and score. Let's rule out the 65-yard punt return that effectively handed Kansas City another touchdown, but took some more time off the clock. Of the 10 longest offensive plays for Kansas City, just one of them was a deep pass. It was a deep pass in the first quarter. It was 2nd and 8 at the Eagles' 18. It was for 18 yards. It was a deep pass to Travis Kelce. That's it. Just one of them was a deep pass. Everything else was a run or a short pass. You know what that tells me? That tells me either A, guys are being left wide open to be able to run, or B, guys aren't being tackled. And there was a lot of talk in the days after regarding the condition of the field, regarding the fact that players were slipping quite a bit over there in Super Bowl or on the Super Bowl field. The NFL spent $800 million for that field, and that is an absolutely atrocious thing for the NFL to be doing, to be paying that much amount or that much money for a field that is just not playable. But that also works to the advantage of the defense in a certain sense, because if it's like playing in a water park, which is what was being said by the players, on both sides, it was like playing in a water park on that field. Then one thing that should happen is that it should be easier to get a player down before they get 10 yards, which was what kept happening. The longest offensive play for Kansas City was a 26-yard scramble in the fourth quarter by Patrick Mahomes. 26 yards. They ran from the Eagles' 43 to the 17. This was with 2:55 left in the game. That's the longest offensive play. Again, we rule out the scoop and score. We rule out the 65-yard punt return, which, again, falls into this category. The Eagles' special teams has had a tremendous degree of problems over the course of this year. And those problems were made manifest today. Those problems were made manifest on Sunday. The Eagles' special teams does not does not do a good job of tackling, does not do a good job of getting players down. And so you're giving up 12-yard returns. You're giving up 65-yard returns in the Super Bowl. 65-yard returns in the Super Bowl is not acceptable regardless of who you are. They're just not. So Mahomes had his 26-yard um, return, that or 26-yard run. That was the longest passing play, or that was the longest offensive play. Um, Isaiah, the next one was a 24-yard run by Isaiah Pacheco. Um, that happened in the first quarter. The next several longest plays, the 24-yard run. There was and then there were three passes for 22, 20, and 18. Those were the longest. Those were the top five longest plays, and they all occurred except for Mahomes' late game run. All occurred in the fourth quarter or in the first quarter, and then everything else, nothing was more than 15 yards. So what's happening is the Chiefs are realistically they're moving the football, but these top 10 plays, the fact that they're all short, the fact that they're all short passes or runs means that tackles were being missed or guys were being left open, and that should not be happening in the Super Bowl. And if you are a Super Bowl caliber defense, you know how to make those adjustments because you had to know that your opponent was going to be making them on offense too. So, bottom line with all of this, as we look back on this game, as we look back on the frustration, the offense did an exceptional job. The offense did an exceptional job. The offense went toe to toe with one of the best teams in the league, led by the NFL's MVP this year, led by somebody who should be somebody who it's way too early to predict he's going to be in the Hall of Fame, but somebody who may wind up there. Certainly under a head coach that is going to be there. The Kansas City Chiefs, again, are one of the best teams in the league, and the Eagles' offense went toe-to-toe with them, matching them drive for drive, score for score. And what it came down to was who had the ball last, and who had the ball last was the Kansas City Chiefs. And offensively, they won. Now, offensively, both teams did a great job. The defense needed a lot of work. Defense needed a lot of work. Kansas City made the stops they made when they made them. They knew what they needed to do. They stopped the Eagles from scoring a couple of times. They didn't force any takeaways on their end. The Jalen Hurts fumble that happened at the beginning of the game, or that happened in the second quarter, really that was Jalen Hurts just dropping the football. It wasn't because he was pressured. It wasn't because he was hit. It wasn't because of anything like that. It was an uncharacteristically bad drop that resulted in 7 points for the other team. But at the end of the day, Kansas City didn't need to force turnovers because they were able to stop the Eagles from scoring on a few drives, and on a few drives when it was really important for them to do so, and in areas where it was really important for them to do so. The Eagles' defense could not do likewise. The Eagles' defense needed to keep the Chiefs from going down the field, and just at the end of the day, that did not happen. Kansas City had their run with the Eagles defense. They had their way with us, and that's an absolute disappointment. So we're still frustrated. This is going to be an Eagles game that this is going to be an Eagles team that that squandered an opportunity. This possibly could have been one of the best teams in franchise history because this team really, really had the potential for the first time. I remember going to an event and hearing Mel Reese talk about how when we did win the Super Bowl in Super Bowl 52, he didn't expect us to. He did not expect us to win in Super Bowl 52, and he said that because just looking at the team, he wasn't anticipating that was going to be a thing. And so it came totally by surprise. I think it caught most of us by surprise, but this season was an absolutely heartbreaking, anticlimactic, whatever adjective you want to use, catastrophic end to what could have been a absolutely magical season that started with the Eagles going 8-0 for the first time in franchise history. It started with the Eagles going undefeated, being the last undefeated team in the NFL. Easily could have happened, or easily could have been there were it not for a few miscues earlier on. But at the end of the day, what can you say except this was, at the end of the day, there were some tough games that the Eagles had to face. And it's really difficult to go undefeated. But but you look back on the season, this was a team that could have and probably should have won. And we always go back to the mantra that there's always next year. So let's look at next year, and let's start to take a look at that. Let's start to take a look at what's coming down the pipeline. Certainly we had some news drop in the last couple of days. The biggest news, that news, of course, being that as the Eagles were on their way back from Arizona and as they were clearing out their locker room yesterday, the Eagles offensive coordinator Shane Steichen went to Indianapolis and finalized a deal to be their next head coach. Shane Steichen, of course, follows in the footsteps of Frank Reich. Frank Reich was fired earlier in the season. And if this whole story sounds familiar, it's because Frank Reich, who was the Eagles' offensive coordinator at the time, won Super Bowl 52, and then due to a withdrawal from an agreement in principle that existed between Indianapolis and their former head coach, and their should have been head coach, Frank Reich was targeted, and he went and became the Indianapolis Colts head coach. So Frank, of course, would ultimately wind up being the beneficiary of the Carson Wentz trade. And I say beneficiary, but I use that term loosely because the Colts got Carson Wentz, and he was only there for a season before they dropped him on Washington. And after the Colts went through everything with them, Reich's tenure was marred by quarterback instability, and the hope certainly is that with somebody like Shane Steichen coming into Indianapolis, that he would be able to find and grow a quarterback for them. And certainly the Eagles have wished him the best of luck as he goes off to do everything that he does. Steichen going away is a tough loss for the Eagles. He watched Jalen Hurts. He worked with Jalen Hurts. We watched the two of them start to form this offense under the Sirianni leadership in the coaching room. Just the way that the offense flourished under the leadership of Sirianni and particularly under the leadership of Steichen is it's tremendous, and it's not something that you want to give up easily. So for Steichen to be leaving. It's certainly disappointing, and we certainly wish him the best. Um, and then we have on the flip, and then it was announced yesterday evening on the flip side of the ball that the defensive coordinator, Jonathan Gannon, is also going away. Now, Jonathan Gannon is the person who caught most of the flack for the Eagles' Super Bowl loss. And the big key was that Gannon was burned on, or Gannon's defense was burned on two plays that were exactly the same. That is poor coaching, and I'm not disputing any of that. But the Eagles were also number one in the league in the defense, or on the defensive side of the ball, in multiple categories. And if they were not number one in multiple categories, they were top 5 in multiple categories. I alluded earlier to the sack statistic. Certainly, the sack statistic is one of the most standout ones. But if we take a look over at the regular, or at other stats within the regular season, we also find that the Eagles defense, just as a unit, was really, 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 really good in a number of places where you broke the ball or broke it down. So the Eagles were top 3 in terms of total yards per game defensive, I'm sorry, clicked the wrong table there. The Eagles were number 2 in the league in defensively in total yards per game on average. They were 301.5 yards per game on average during the regular season. And then again during the regular season, they were number 1 in the league in total yards per play defensively. It was 4.78 yards allowed there. They were the number 1 passing defense. They allowed 179.8 yards per game in passing throughout the regular season. They allowed 5.5 passing yards per play. Again, that was number 1 through the regular season. They were the number 1 passing defense. The interception rate was 6th in the league. It was 3.06% interception rate. So for every 100 passes, a little bit more than 3 of them were intercepted. And then we already talked about, again, the 12.59% sacks per pass attempt rate. That, again, was league best in the through the regular season. But when you take a look at it as well, there are other problems. There were other problems. The Eagles' run defense in particular was very mid. The Eagles' run defense was tied in rushing yards per game for 16th. They allowed 121.6 rushing yards per game, tied for 16th through the regular season, tied for 16th with the New York Jets. And the New York Jets allowed, on average, less rushing yards per play. They allowed 4.2 rushing yards per play. That was ranked 10th in the league. If we break it down, that statistic, the Eagles allowed 4.64 rushing yards per play on average through the regular season. That was 24th in the league out of 32. So that is barely the 75th percentile. This rushing defense, the run defense, really needs to improve on that front, because those things really need to happen. And then again, the first downs per game, the Eagles allowed on average 19.1 first downs per game. That was 13th in the league. All of these stats were regular season stats. Through the postseason, those numbers do definitely differ. So we spent a lot of time focusing on that, but Gannon was a mixed bag on that front there. Whereas offensively, I mean, take a look. We saw how much the offense had changed And a lot of that was Jalen Hurts and getting him weapons. A lot of that was Howie, certainly. But a lot of that was also the guidance that was offered by Steichen, who also was the play caller. Sirianni did not want to call plays, so he opted. So Sirianni just opted to hand the play calling over to Steichen, and Steichen did a really good job with that. Yeah, so that's the name of that tune. So those coordinators are gone at this point. Jonathan Gannon has taken the head coaching job for the Arizona Cardinals, and Shane Steichen has taken Jonathan Gannon has taken the head coaching job for the Arizona Cardinals. Shane Steichen has taken the head coaching job for the Indianapolis Colts. And it's time to find replacements for them. There are definitely some options there. The Eagles do have those options internally. Brian Johnson is the most obvious choice for that regard because he is the quarterback's coach. So he, of course, is one of the folks who's been working very, very closely with Jalen Hurts. It's definitely a reasonable thing to do. Hurts and Johnson have a decent family friendship. So Johnson's history with Hurts definitely helps with that. There are other names that are circling around. Marcus Brady has been dropped down. Greg Roman has been dropped. There have been other names. Eric Bieniemy from stealing the Kansas City Chiefs. Stealing from the Kansas City Chiefs as a offensive coordinator. He was on the short list for a number of head coaching roles, but this season, with all of the head coaching roles having been filled, the Arizona Cardinals role was the last one, and Gannon took it. So Eric Bieniemy could be contemplating a lateral move, and if he's contemplating a lateral move, then the Eagles may be a good fit for him on the offensive side. On the flip side, we have to take a look at the defense. We have to start looking at looking at the defensive end as well. We've heard a few names. Nick Rallis is already on the team. He's the Eagles' current linebackers coach. Tracy Rocker is the Eagles' defensive line coach. Denard Wilson, another one. He's been the defensive passing game coordinator and the defensive backs coach. Those are some internal options that have been named. There are certainly some others. Gerard Mayo from the New England Patriots and Lovie Smith have been dropped. But if they certainly Lovie Smith was the head coach of the Chicago Bears when the Bears made their appearance in the Super Bowl against the Indianapolis Colts. So it would be, and he is a much more of a defensive opening. It does seem like the replacement for Steichen is going to be Brian Johnson. It's pretty clear. It seems to be a little bit clearer for him. Whereas on the defensive end, there's definitely a lot more options. So we will see what happens on that front. So that having been said, once those are the top two priorities, and then once those two priorities are set, Then what needs to happen is the Eagles need to start to look at the roster and what is the roster going to do. Um, the Eagles have, according to Over the Cap, the Eagles have 18 free agents. 18 free agents set or whose contracts are going to expire this year. They're going to be unrestricted free agents, or they could be restricted. Um, the Eagles have 18 free agents, and there are some big names on here. James Bradbury, certainly, he's a little bit responsible for the. He's the guy who held in the final couple minutes that handed Kansas City a first down and the game. Um, but we got some big names here. Fletcher Cox, who has been playing on a 1-year deal, and that 1-year deal is up. Um, Miles Sanders and Boston Scott, or two people on the rushing end. Miles Sanders certainly has had a much bigger impact this year than Boston Scott has, but the fact that the Eagles have a little bit of a running back by committee kind of situation going on is important there. Um, Javon Hargrave as a defensive tackle. Safety Marcus Epps, C.J. Gardner Johnson, another safety. He's on the list. Linval Joseph, a defensive tackle. He was brought in midway through the season. Isaac Seumalo, Robert Quinn, Zach Pascal, Gardner Minshew, and Damakong Su. Again, he was another midseason pickup. Kaiser White. These are guys that are going to be these are guys who are on their way out the door. And the Eagles need to determine which ones they're going to extend, which ones they're going to go after in free agency. Bearing in mind that the Eagles have, as of right now, again, according to Over the Cap, they have about $8 million of cap space. And Jalen Hurts is eligible for a contract extension this year. He is in year 3 of his rookie contract. The Eagles have been very clear, and certainly his performance in Super Bowl 57 has demonstrated that he is going to be the guy for at least the foreseeable future. So it is going to be very important for the Eagles to lock him up in terms of a contract. Now, that conversation's not happening today. That conversation is not happening. There's no real pressure for them to have it right now. Jalen Hurts said yesterday during locker room cleanout day that yesterday was not the day. That now is not the time. Right now is the time, at least for him, to focus on growing from his experience in Super Bowl 57, and certainly hoping that he can get himself back there. There are a lot of players here that are definitely worthy of an extension. There are a lot of players here who they may see fit to move on. Certainly, guys. I'm looking at a few here. James Bradbury is not that much younger than I am. Fletcher Cox is older than I am. There are a number of guys here who are in their 30s and who they might decide, you know what, now is the time to retire. Brandon Graham and Jason Kelsey are two of the longest tenured players on the team, and they could decide at any moment that they're done. It would definitely be disappointing if they did, but they could decide that. So if you look at some of these players, and if you look at some of the ages there are a lot of players who are in their 30s, and it is unsurprising that those guys would be contemplating retirement. Tyree Jackson, by the way, was also one of the folks who's slated for free agency. He's a tight end. He spent a lot of the season on injured reserve. So he hasn't really been noticeable because Dallas Goedert has been the guy at tight end. but he's also on the list. Um, I can definitely see a number of folks here as I'm looking at this list. The Eagles are just going to let walk. Rick Kern, for example, he was really only brought in to cover for Aaron Siposs when Siposs was down, and Kern's job was to tend the shop, and he didn't even really do that well. So I would not be surprised if they let somebody like him walk. And again, there are a number of folks here who they will go and they'll look for who's able to pay them the most money, and they'll walk at that point. But yeah, there are a number of folks on that list. So the Eagles are faced right now with a lot of questions. Eagles are faced with a lot of questions at a lot of really, really key points. Who are the players that are going to be around? How much of this team is how are going to be able to preserve and bring forward? How much of this team is going to be in need of replacement? Certainly, besides just the coordinators, how much of this team is going to need to be replaced? Where are we going to replace them? The Eagles do a really, really good job of drafting really solid linemen in the draft. So that might be a place where we look for replacements for some of these guys. Some guys like some of these defensive linemen. Robert Quinn could be an example of that. Robert Quinn could be an example of that. If they let him walk, they could grab somebody in the draft. I don't think we're 100% there with a number of these players. That having been said, I don't think we're fully there with that. Where if somebody like Fletcher Cox retires, it will be a huge loss. Or if he goes off, because I don't think that we're at that point yet where the Eagles have some, and it would be a huge loss if Fletch left at this point. And I would love to see him maybe be involved more of a transition as they brought in another defensive tackle with the idea of replacing him. The Eagles do a good job of swapping some folks out, but we definitely want to make sure that we don't lose the aggression that somebody like a Fletcher Cox is able to provide. And then again, going forward, like Andre Dillard, we could get some guys to replace some folks on the linemen as we're working through them. It will be interesting to see what's coming down the pipeline. So that's the name of that tune. Super Bowl 57 is over. The 2022-2023 NFL season is over. And now it's time to start looking forward. Some key dates are coming down the pipeline. What are those dates? Well, biggest dates that are coming down the pipeline are, starting on the 21st. That's less than a week away. Players may be designated, or clubs may designate players as franchise or transition players. The scouting combine is coming up at the end of the month, and then it's the to designate franchise or transition players. I don't see the Eagles necessarily doing that for any of them. or for any of our current players. That could happen. And then from March 13th through the 15th, clubs may start contacting and entering into contract negotiations with certified agents of players who will become unrestricted. So clubs may start contacting players in less than a month for free agency. Free agency will officially begin on March the 15th at 4 o'clock when the new league year and the free agency period begins. And then the draft comes up at the end of April. So it's going to be a crazy season, a crazy off season. Lots of questions will hopefully be answered very soon. So let me know what you think. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Let me know what you think. Check us out on social media. We are Bird's Nest Media. You can check us out on Twitter, Bird's Nest FB, Facebook. You can visit us at facebook.com/birdsnestmedia. Right here on YouTube, of course. And of course, we have our website, birdsnestmedia.com, where you can visit. You can review all kinds of written content, and it's also where you can subscribe to our Patreon. We have a link to the Patreon below. We do also have a link to Patreon over on birdsnestmedia.com. Your support is your support really helps this channel. Your support really helps. Please, again, feel free to like, subscribe to this YouTube channel. We're going to feeling out what's going to happen over the off season. I've got some plans for some content and how that's going to work. But I definitely appreciate you taking the time to share this with us. Bird's Nest Media will be present over the course of the off season as we're monitoring everything. Definitely hope to have some engaging and exciting things to share with you. So until I see you guys next time, thanks so much for watching. I'm Joe Donahue.